Starting the recording. So we're live on Facebook. So we're going to give them a second or two to notify everybody that we're here. So hello, Lisa. Hello, Jocelyn.
Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
Well, so glad that you both are here. I was telling Jocelyn in the green room that I was one of the lucky ones that got an early read on this. And if you haven't read it yet, hopefully there's some people. It's been out for what, about a week now, Jocelyn?
About 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. Okay, been 2 weeks. So there's plenty of time for people to have read this already. So, but if you haven't, we're in for such a, this is just an incredible book. I just can't stop talking about it, but I will, so you two can talk about it. So Lisa, you are coming to us from right here in San Diego. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. And Jocelyn, where are you calling in from?
So I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay.
So it's 7 at night here, my East Coast.
Night. So it's about 4 o'clock here. We've got both the coasts covered. Hopefully we have some people maybe joining us in between. But for those that maybe are joining us from outside the San Diego area, and Jocelyn maybe from where closer to where you're at, if people who aren't familiar with Warwick's, we're located in La Jolla, which is a little town just north of the San Diego proper area. My little sign there says 1896. So we are celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so while we're not the oldest bookstore in the country, oldest continuously family owned. Nancy's our 4th generation owner. So one of the things that we're known for doing is bringing the community wonderful authors. So Jocelyn, thank you for joining us, even if it's virtually. Really happy to have you here. So a couple things for tonight. I will be chatting with people in the comment section, and I will put in my Monticello into the comment section. You can easily click on that to order it. If you're in the San Diego area, we would love for you can click pick up in store. We'd love to see you come in the store. Lots of other things to look at when you pick up Jocelyn's book. Or another thing I like to always say, any way you can get a book, you actually can get it from Warwick's or your local independent bookstore. We do actually ship books. So it's easy to get them from us or from your local bookstore. So I'll be putting that into the comment section. The other thing to do, Jocelyn and Lisa are going to talk for about 35-ish minutes tonight. And we always love audience questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and put that into the comment section. I'll pop back onto their conversation about a half hour in, maybe a little bit longer, and we'll bring those questions into the conversation too. So don't be shy and make sure you ask those questions. We always love those. So with that, I'm going to introduce you two lovely ladies and get the show on the road, as they say. So Jocelyn Nicole Johnson's writing has appeared in Guernica. Do you say Guernica or Guernica?
I say Guernica, but
yeah, because I Basque I'm Basque, and so we've always said Guernica, but I think I always hear it in the literary world as I'm going to mess it up now, so forget it. The Guardian, Phoebe, Prime Number Magazine, and elsewhere. Her short story, Control Negro, was anthologized in Best American Short Stories 2018, guest edited by Roxane Gay, and read live by LeVar Burton as part of PRI's Selected Shorts series. Jocelyn, Jocelyn. Jocelyn has been a fellow at Hedgebrook, Tin House Summer Workshops, and BCCA. A veteran public school art teacher. She lives and writes in, like she said, Charlottesville, Virginia. She's here today to talk about again. Oh, I'm going to throw it. My Monticello. Oh, the lead story in this is just, oh my God, it's incredible. Anyway, joining Jocelyn is Lisa Deaderick. Lisa is a columnist with the San Diego Union Tribune, where she writes about social justice issues in her Sunday column, as well as influential San Diegans for the one-on-one series that runs each Saturday. Each week, she's speaking with community activists, academics, volunteers, and other knowledgeable individuals about everything from the benefits of music and education and the creative work of notable artists to understanding the importance of representation and inclusiveness. A Chula Vista native, Lisa graduated from Bethune-Cookman University in Florida and Columbia University in New York, and has worked at the Union Tribune since 2008. Ladies, have a great conversation. We'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so before I jump in, we have the added privilege of Jocelyn reading an excerpt from her debut book, My Monticello.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to read My Monticello is 5 short stories and a novella that are highly thematically related. I'm going to read just the beginning of the novella for which the whole collection is named, and that's really the biggest physical piece of the work and kind of an anchoring piece of the work. So I'm just going to read maybe 5 minutes from the beginning. My Monticello. We claimed it first, this little mountain. Me and Ma Violet and a scattering of neighbors, all of us fleeing First Street after men came and set our row of 10 roofed homes on fire. The men came at dusk, blaring an operatic, "Oh, say, can you see?" White heads rose up from dusty jeeps, and dark hair thrashed in a harsh new wind like tattered flags. Ours, the men shouted. Their rifles gleamed as if they'd only just been bought, a megastore militia. Through the hasty breach in my Violet's blinds, I even saw a boy among them, blonde and sneering in a pickup window. Men leapt from back seats, sprang out of truck beds, and rushed towards the faces of our homes. White hands clutched metal canisters, swung torches spilling flames. Bright shouts, the rising haze of smoke, all that and more rousted us out. From our patchy front yards, we saw bodies blur as some of our neighbors charged forward to try to stop them. We saw a teen struck with the butt of a rifle, his temple spraying red. A toddler flailed, diapered and clinging to its mother's hips as she sank, knees first, to the sidewalk. What we saw in those moments riveted us, and then it set us free. I think I'm going to stop there. I just read the first paragraph of that story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Because in listening to that and being able to like see the imagery of it in my mind, especially the line about the boy in the truck, it reminded me of a scene later on where that interaction is kind of visited. I won't ruin it for people, but it's visited in another way. So first I want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with us, with me and everyone watching, and congratulations on your debut book, My Monticello. One of my first questions is, you know, knowing that, or at least reading that you've been a public school art teacher, have you heard from any of your students about your book, and what are they saying? Have they read it?
So I can't say I hope they don't read it, but I teach really little kids.
Oh, okay.
And it's an intense book. But I know that some of the kids that were older and are a couple of years older since I last taught them, or some of the kids that I had that are now adults, because I've been teaching for 20 years, have definitely read the book, or are planning to. I have like a few pictures that were sent to me of kids with books, and we have like a free speech wall in Charlottesville on the downtown mall, and one of my like younger kids wrote like a really nice message and then took a picture with the book. That was just super nice. So I've had a really warm reception from families and from kids, and a few kids actually came. We had one live event here in Charlottesville, and there were some students there as well, so I got to see them briefly.
Oh, that's great. That's got to be exciting for them.
It is, I think it is.
You know, even as much as it's for you, yeah. And LeVar Burton, reading your story.
I know. Did you see me whenever I keep that in my bio just because it makes me happy?
What was that experience like for you? Like, I can't even imagine him reading, you know, words that you wrote, like hearing that happen.
That was really incredible. So that happened after the short story. The first story in the book, Control Negro, was anthologized in the Best American Short Stories, which was amazing to begin with. And then he selected it out of that, and it was wonderful. And he actually, I think he like tweeted to me and just said that it went really well, and just it was really nice. And he does such a good job on it, and he's featured on the audiobook as well.
Oh, great. Okay.
So,
yeah. Okay, so am I correct in understanding that you're born and raised in Virginia? Is that right?
That is true.
So,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. So it's clear, obviously, in the book how prominent a role Virginia has in the book and the stories within it. And so I'm curious about how the history and culture of Virginia have contributed to your point of view as a writer.
Absolutely. So all 5 stories in the novella all take place in Virginia. Let me just say, first of all, even though it's called My Monticello and the place of Monticello, the contemporary place, features largely in that novella, and Virginia features largely in the story. I'm just a really bad historian. I'm a lousy historian. I'm not an academic. And so I really came to this. So I think of the history in this as a personal thing. The way that I came to history, a lot of it came from looking at the current moment and things that were happening in the, you know, up until about 2020 here and now. And then kind of asking questions like, well, how did we get here and what happened here and why is this way? And then going backwards in history that way, as opposed to starting with, oh, this was interesting in the past, that way that we're connected to the past. And I also think about it in the way that we think about family history. We all know that our history and our family, whether we're the baby of the family, what our relationship was like with our parents or our grandparents, you know, how we got along with our siblings or didn't, affects us as adults. We know that. That's just something that you know if you're an adult. You kind of get to that. But I think the larger history can be that way too. So I kind of approached it in that same way, thinking about how do the things that happened before us and to the people before us create a line to what's happening now and how are they connected? So I thought a lot about how Virginia, you were saying I did. I'm a Virginian. I was born here. I was raised here. I'm actually the only person in my immediate family who was born in Virginia. Everyone else was born in South Carolina. So I have all the cousins and huge extended family in South Carolina.
Yeah.
But, you know, Virginia should be kind of unequivocally home for me. And it is. You know, I grew up in Northern Virginia. I went to college at James Madison in the Shenandoah Valley. I've taught here for 20 years. So, but yet, I think some of the recent events that have happened made me think, well, there's a space between how at home I should feel and how at home I actually feel. And specifically in Charlottesville, in August of 2017, we had the Unite the Right rally here, which was this very violent and unsettling event that wasn't just a day, but was a kind of a whole summer of lead up, and then culminating in an event where someone was killed, where a helicopter fell, where there was just a lot of rhetoric and energy around the idea of, I felt like of people saying, as a Black person and as a woman, this isn't your home, you shouldn't feel safe here. So it was about that exploration of the difference between those two things, feeling at home, this being my home, and what are the ways in which it doesn't feel like home, and why is that in the present, and why was that in the past?
And hearing you talk about that, sort of asking yourself those questions, I was reading an interview that you did with NPR's Code Switch, where you were quoted as saying that you ask these sets of questions for yourself as you're writing, and as you did that in the book. And so I was curious, a few of the stories that I'll name in succession for you to answer, but so what were some of the questions you were asking yourself in Control Negro? And to start off, if you'd just like to tell people briefly what that story is about.
Absolutely. So in this Control Negro is the first story in the collection. It's the one we were talking about that LeVar Burton read. And it is I say it's a Frankenstein-like story of a Black professor who is writing a kind of confessional letter to his son, Cornelius Adams. He's writing a letter to his son who doesn't even know that he's his actual father. He has a stepfather that he believes, the son has a stepfather that he believes is his father. And he's basically confessing that he's been, for the whole life of the son, running the secret clandestine experiment to compare his son to what he calls ACMs, which are average American Caucasian males, in order to test America's promise of equity, of life, liberty for all, and happiness for all, kind of to see if his son is perfect enough, if he if he can also enjoy this promise of safety and care from a country standpoint. So it's a story. And so in that, yeah, and that story actually, people in Charlottesville might recognize, they may not, but it came out of another real event where a young college student in 2015 at University of Virginia was bloodied by officers, and it kind of was this echo of some of the violence towards Black people and Black men at the hands of the police. And in this case was also caught on video, and there were, at any rate. So one of the questions that I was thinking about, my son was young at the time, and I was thinking, what does it mean to try to keep your child safe here? And also to describe to your child how race might interact with in the ways that he or she might relate to the world and relate to a police interaction seemed like its own kind of injury. to try to explain that things might not be safe when they should be, or things might be brutal when they only need the regular interaction, seemed like its own kind of injury. So I kind of took it to this extreme, a very extreme in the story as kind of a thought experiment.
My jaw dropped when, he revealed like his role. I was just, I kind of wanted to fight Cornelius a little bit. Like, how dare you?
You are not the first person to tell me that. And I will say, I wanted to fight him too, but in this, even though I wrote him that way and I had him do the things he does, there's a way in which I think of him as very narcissistic and very self-absorbed, but also trying to overcome the injury of his own violence, that the things that happened to him. There's this way in which he's desperately trying to
the desperation,
to figure that out. And I think that one of the projects of this was to think about the ways in which racism and othering and the boundaries, these kind of artificial boundaries that have really real effects in our life, both interpersonally and systemic, how they create psychological harm within us and between us. And so that was part of what I was just thinking about.
Yeah. And so to stay on that story for a moment, there's a passage after Cornelius finds the student's drawing of him as an ape, and where he talks about having essentially played by white people's rules and achieve the way he speaks, the way he dresses, avail. And so he's still seen as this animal rather than a human being. And so for me, it clearly raised in my mind, like recognizing this kind of ongoing debate between choosing to lean into respectability versus unapologetic Blackness or authenticity. So was that part of what you were exploring in the story too? Did you find any answers in that exploration?
I definitely was thinking about that tension, particularly, just how I grew up and how just all the things, right? So definitely thinking about that. I don't know what the answers are, but I certainly don't think it's an impossible equation to try to be respectable for racism. I mean, that's kind of part of, and no one should have to even begin to try to be.
Right.
So that definitely is, I hope, comes through in the story through this very weird lens of the way I think about it, even if Cornelius might not speak that.
And so then in like another story that really hit me heavy in my chest was Virginia Is Not Your Home. And so, before that, I feel like you would do a much better job of just giving people an idea of what that story is about. And then I would like to also ask for that one, what questions were you asking yourself in the writing of that story?
Sure, I love that you like them. It's interesting when you write a collection, people often, it's hard not to pick what you like, or because you're comparing them side by side. And I always like to hear what different people respond to. So that story was going to be the title of the whole book, Virginia Is Not Your Home. to begin with. I wrote the novella last, and then once we got there, it felt like a call and an answer. So that story, Virginia's Not Your Home, is a story about a person in second person. She's kind of telling herself the story of her life, and it kind of goes, it's a very brief story. It kind of goes from her teenageness all the way towards later in life. And she is a person who wants to change her name. I've known a lot of people who want to change their name. I always find that really interesting and kind of suspect, like when they're all of a sudden like, call me Leanna or something out of nowhere. It's not their middle name, it's just a name. So she wants to change her name. Her name is Virginia. She wants to escape where she is. She is biracial, and she has a kind of an interesting relationship with her mother and father, but they remain in this place where she grew up, this rural place, and she wants to speak French. She ends up marrying a French person. She wants to leave the state. She wants to leave the country. She also has this just general ambition as a young woman that isn't very supported in her community. The idea of being an intellectual or all these things are not quite what's going on around her. And so the story kind of circles back around to like, where are you at home? What's important? How are you connected to this or that? And it's just a really, I think, a story that's pushed a lot by language and by the way it sounds. So for that story, for Virginia's Not Your Home, I mean, I think it gets really closely back to what I said at the beginning, is this idea of where and why should you feel at home and at peace? And I mean, in a way, the answer is you're here, wherever you are, there's not like you're going to find a place and all of a sudden it's going to be
that everything clicks into
solve it for you. There may be a place where you are reflected in a way that can be really comfortable, for sure. But there is something about you're connected to the place you came from, regardless, even if it's in a pushing away from it. And I think I within that story, the story is very not about me, but of course there's pieces of things, but I really use just kind of this love letter to Virginia idea of using like, she's in these different parts of Virginia that I've lived in or that I know, and describing them and showing like just the diversity and beauty of the place. So even though it's a story about not being at home, there's this way that all the places are kind of highlighted there and listed together and collected.
And so for me in reading it, it was, by the time I finished the story, the line that just kept coming to me over and over was Langston Hughes, what happened deferred, because it felt like to me that like she didn't get a chance to get there, right? Like the man that she marries gets to live his dream of being this photographer, and she, seems like she's at home and she's with the kids and they're in suburbia and she didn't finish her degree, like just sort of all of these things along the way that she seemed to be, like her dream seemed that it was kind of hazy, like she never got to finish like really defining it or figuring it out, even up to that very last line of like, well, there's still time, like, right, you still have time, it's not too late to try and do these things. And so I guess I was wondering, like, for you, you've been,
You're frozen, but we can hear you. We can still hear you fine, but you're frozen. You're not moving, but we can hear you.
I wonder if we lost her completely.
I wonder if she's trying to come back on, which is possible.
Yeah.
I'll answer that in the meantime. That idea of, well, I do think in that story, Virginia's Not Your Home, I was thinking about just as a lot to do with gender, right? That idea of what's acceptable and who supports someone else's dream. So she's definitely kind of working within the system where she is not kind of the center. She's in the support role, but she's the super ambitious person who really wants to shine. So that was certainly there.
And I mean, I read this, that was the Virginia's Not Your Home. So did you, and I'm going to go to a structural because I think Lisa's going to go more deeply into like each individual story and things. Although my Monticello, I have to say, was my personal favorite, but love them all. Like the Control Negro is just amazing. But so did you like reshuffle and figure out which ones would go first, or was this always the way when you were writing them? Did they always kind of go in this order, or?
No, I wrote a few stories first before I knew I was making a collection. And then I had this idea that they were going to be about Virginia. They were going to be about this idea of home. They were going to kind of feature racial and environmental anxieties and confronting history, which definitely comes out in the last story. And so then I started to say, which stories that I've written recently fit with this? I ended up having 2 stories, and then I wrote the other 3 over the period of time. And then I wrote the novella last. And the novella definitely kind of pulled in all the strands of all those questions, I think. And so I think it really anchors all the stories around it. And then the ordering was just thinking about, well, you know, just playing, it's fun to order things. Like you think, okay, what belongs here, and what, you know, how do you want, you know, there's so many different voices, there's a lot of different characters. So you want it to have variety. So it goes from like a male speaker to a female speaker to something that's more concrete to something that's a little bit more poetic and so forth. And then ending with the novella, which,
right. And then, but they all just kind of, like you said, they flow into each other just perfectly. Okay, Lisa's coming back in, so we'll see if that. But so, did you sell the collection as a whole, or did you have an idea and get the collection going? Hi, Lisa. We were just keep talking.
I don't know what happened. I noticed a freeze, and I was like, "Oh no, I haven't had problems with my internet in like a month."
We can hear you, but you were freezing. So,
okay. I wasn't sure if you could hear me because I couldn't hear you. So,
yeah.
So Jocelyn did answer your question, and then I just asked a structural question, and then I'll save my other question for later. So I'm going back away.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'm just going to the question that I was going to ask about that story was, you've been writing since you were a child. Was it always your dream to be a published author?
No, but I knew I love, like when I was a kid, I was that kid who was like making art and draw and writing stories, and I wanted to do that, and I really liked it, but I didn't necessarily have that idea of being a published author until I was a teenager. I read S.C. Hinton's The Outsiders, and she wrote that as a teenager, and then that was like, oh, I could. Okay, so I like wrote a novel when I was like a teenager and kind of had that idea, but I still wasn't really looking at studying writing in that way. I ended up going to college and studying art and becoming a public school art teacher. And it wasn't until I was about 30 that I started writing again with a little bit more intention and that focus. And I had a class where the teacher said, oh, you should get an MFA, you should send stuff out to little literary magazines and so forth. And that's when I thought, okay, I'm going to actually try to get things in magazine, you know, just in literary magazines and so forth. I'd send out, you know, that's when you mailed stuff still. You could mail out your story. It was a while ago. And then slowly I kept escalating kind of my vision of what I might want to do, both from my internal drive, and also I had, you know, people approach me at classes and so forth and say, oh, do you, you know, so that's kind of how I got into having an agent and trying to sell a story. But to me, it was just a matter of, in a way, it was about, I think when you have a sense of audience or when you have a goal, it creates excitement to write. It creates motivation, a sense of audience. I mean, it could be a writing group. It doesn't have to be an agent, but you do want audience at some level. It doesn't have to be a published book, you know, in a bookstore. It can be a group of people, but if you're making something, you want an audience for it. I mean, that's part of the process, is to have it be received somewhere. And so I think that helps you hone it, and really it makes you think about what you're saying more. It makes you care, but think about to me, it makes me want it to be better and to strive and push myself to think about a bigger audience, or think about trying to get that next step. So
yeah,
hopefully it serves the making.
Yes.
Lisa, Lisa's frozen again.
Oh no.
Oh,
I feel so bad. Like she said, she hasn't had internet problems. It never fails though, I swear. Like Mercury's in retrograde, I think, Lisa.
Oh, she's back.
You were frozen again.
Oh.
So you
But
went
you're
blank.
back.
So we didn't hear anything that you just said. So
Shoot. Okay, let me try to connect.
Well, just go on. And if you go off, you can.
Yeah. I'll fill in again.
Okay. So what was the last part of what you were able to hear, I guess?
I answered your question.
Okay.
Now I've lost my whole.
No, that's
I've
okay.
lost my whole train of thought. I'm sorry.
So I think I was asking about because I've been asking what questions you were asking yourself as you're writing these stories. And so for the title story of My Monticello, with the other two questions, there seemed to be a theme about asking yourself about where is home and what feels like home. Were those similar questions you were asking as you were writing My Monticello?
Yes, but I think I really expanded it because My Monticello was most directly a response to August 12th here, as I said before, when we had Unite the Right, kind of this white nationalist rally here that resulted in someone being killed, a counter protester, and all these other things. But in the year afterwards, as our community was kind of grappling with what does that mean? What did the Confederate statues mean? How are we going to deal with this thing that happened here? There were all these really great local opportunities to learn more about the local history in relation to race, in relation to Black communities. And so I went to a whole bunch of talks. I went to one about a photographer who was a white photographer, but he took all these pictures of a certain percentage of his pictures. He was an equal opportunity, I'll take your money. So he had all these pictures of Black people as well. And so this professor did a talk just on those pictures, kind of this set of pictures of all these different kinds of people, some wealth, some more middle classy, some, just not. And it was so fascinating for me to think about not just history, but it felt really tied to now, and it felt really tied to this place. And since I live about 10 minutes from Monticello, I went to a talk that was about Sally Hemings, about some creatives talking about that. And that really connected for me what happened now to this idea of Thomas Jefferson's time and the descendants that some of whom still live in this area. So thinking about that connection through family, through history, through, like I said, that idea of it like a personal thing, not necessarily like these facts happen, but what does that actually mean? And so in the story of My Monticello, I centered the person telling the story is a college student. She lives in town with her grandmother, and she is a descendant of both Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And she still doesn't feel at home at Monticello. So it's this idea of, if not someone who's both descended from the person who designed this house and had the funds to make it, and also this person who served the house, whose family, the Hemingses, craftspeople who built the house, who worked to make this wealth for this other person. If not that person feeling safe in that home, then who might, who would. So that's what I was thinking about there. And hi again. Can you hear me? I like.
So I'm on my phone now. I'm on my phone. I've given up on the computer. It's not. It doesn't like me today. I'm so sorry.
No worries. So I was answering all your question, and then so in My Monticello, I think some of the questions I had were who gets to own this history, who gets to feel comfortable in the place of Monticello, whose stories get to be included and centered, who gets the grace of being seen as fully human in that space, and what would it look like? I mean, for me, I don't know, what would it look like if the history of enslaved people was treated with as much care as the history of this founding father? Like, what would that even look like? It's almost inconceivable, and it really made me realize the ways in which hadn't even dared to imagine what I might be missing.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
It does. I'm recalling a part in the story where, is it Denasia? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I say Denasia. Well, she goes by Nene, so Denasia. Yeah.
Denasia.
Okay. Where she talks about her mother telling her, quote, hold it as your own, the knowledge that they're descended from Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, and that, quote, there's nothing left for us to do with that old history but to bear it. And I was wondering what you meant by that. Like, what does it mean to bear history?
Well, I think I wanted in that story to think of some of the different ways people relate to their history. So the main character's mother has had really bad experiences sharing that fact in the story. She talks about a time when she tells her teacher this, or at Monticello on a school trip, because that happens here. Everyone goes to Monticello in like 3rd or 4th grade. And it's not only not believed, but it's just treated with a kind of disgust almost. So this mother has kind of decided that this is something to almost shameful. And I think that is one way people can think about the history of having been an enslaved person. I think people who are at the bad end of history often kind of bear it with shame, even though they weren't they shouldn't. They shouldn't be the ones to have to. But then her grandmother has a slightly different, perspective in the story. Denaja's grandmother, Ma Violet, thinks it's more complicated. She isn't like shouting it from the rafters, but there's something, I think she says, a cautious regard. This is something that means something. This is something, somewhat just unique and kind of special. And it's just true. Like this is this connection, and it's important. It's worth. So the grandmother ends up, kind of being recognized by Monticello as a descendant, and times up changed at Monticello from when I first moved here 20 years ago. They are the idea of slavery is much more at the forefront. When you go, it's incorporated into the tours. You can take the Sally Hemings tour, you can take the enslaved people's tour. But they also have a relationship with descendant communities. And that was not the case. I mean, it's been a very incremental change, and it's, really picked up in the last bit of time, but it's a marked change. It was not that way before. When I first moved here. So I wanted to reflect that too. Not only does this family have these ways of dealing with it, but also the institution of Monticello and the way we choose history. It's not like that's just fact. We are people who are deciding which stories. There are people who are deciding which stories to hold up, which ones to prop up, and which ones not to do that with.
And speaking of that, that makes me think of how, I have to say, how much Knox got on my nerves in his conversation with Nasia, where he was trying to find some sliver of romance between Sally and Thomas, and kind of, talking about how they had children together and there had to be some kind of love between them. And I appreciated so much that Nasia pushed back on that, by saying how much love could exist when one person has that much power over the other. And then Knox still had to try and say, well, every relationship, somebody has a little bit more power over the other. And I wanted to kind of throttle him a little bit, like, this is totally different. Whereas, most people in a relationship typically have the freedom to leave the relationship if they're no longer happy. This doesn't exist for Sally and other enslaved people. So, to me, it kind of reminded me of like how often people seem to want to skip over the reality of that power dynamic when talking about this part of the country's history. What did you want to communicate about how we understand this history?
I think I wanted to just set it out for people to sit with, because it really struck me that there was this really big push to romanticize that for some, because it was a way to dismiss the horror of it. But in the story, I wanted to kind of think about what does it mean now for this couple, right? This interracial couple to be in this space, and what are the things they understand about the world and the way they use power in the world that they're bringing to this place that is different because they've just had different experiences in it. and how do they, like this group, because it's not just Anasia and her boyfriend Knox, but the whole group of people, everyone's bringing themselves to this space, to this moment. So they've all kind of been rousted out of their neighborhood. They're coming up to Monticello. They don't want to be there. They're basically refugees. They're looking for refuge in this house. And there's this way in which I'm trying to force them to create this small community up there. But they're all bringing these different ideas about Thomas Jefferson, about, there's a family that's the parents immigrated from Africa and they have children that are American here. And the father says, a great and good man. Well, there's this way that men are revered. That's absolutely a thing. And so I didn't want it to be, oh, this person's good and this person's bad, and this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing. But these are some of the things we bring to this, and how will we reckon with it? How are these characters, not even the characters reckon with it, because they're under such intense stress that they're kind of in an emergency situation and they have to kind of figure out whether it's basically life and death, and they have to figure out how to get along and how to survive and create community imperfectly, the way a classroom does. But how will we, the readers, think about all those things and reckon with them, and how will we, what will they bring up in us and our own ways of seeing it, and I don't know what we want to do with it.
And so that, staying on this story, first, congratulations on Netflix picking it up to turn it into a movie. I cannot wait. And I have to ask, can you tell us anything about the movie? Can we know who's gonna be in it? Do we get to see Naisha and Devin and the twins and Knox be victorious at the end in the Netflix version? Like, what can you tell us about the film?
It's still early days, so I can't give you, I would if I could, but I can't give you all the info because it's still being worked out. The screenwriting is still happening now.
Okay.
I will say that in those of you who've read the novella, or if you read the novella, I left it very open. I didn't want to write a story. I thought it would be almost silly to write a story where a group of 20-some people on a hill in Monticello defeat white supremacy. Because it's a story of unraveling. It's a story of not just white supremacy and inequity, but also not having care for our infrastructure, not having care for our environment, and what is the natural outcome of that, right? Mm-hmm. What would happen if we don't? What happens? Forget like someone proving whether this or that's happening. What is the result of not taking care of your home and not taking care of your neighbor to a very extreme? And I think we see that right in the world all the time, and it feels to me like we're seeing it a lot now. And so I didn't want the characters. I thought it would be silly to end with them like, they defeated it and it's all good now and they can just go back.
Fair enough.
And in the movie, I think there will be more Victor, but I still think that feeling should be there, because my intention in the story and what's important to me is that we, the readers, feel motivated to want to care for those characters where they are, and we want to help create not necessarily restoration, but repair and care. What is the good that we can do on the harm that's been done? To acknowledge it and then think, what would we want to do for one another? Because that's the only way I think that things get better.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great place for me to end my part of this very choppy conversation with my internet connection. I apologize again to you, Jocelyn, for everyone watching. It just did not want to let us be great today. But the rest of the conversation was certainly great. So I do appreciate that. And I will go back to, I believe we do have questions from people watching on Facebook.
Yep.
Can I just say, Lisa, that you were very graceful as you came in and out. So you did a really good job. I'm impressed. I would have been a lot more. You would have been like, why is she sweating profusely now? She can't get back on the internet.
I mean, I was wiping up in between, but
there is nothing more frustrating. But the beauty of this is that everybody is used to it, and we all just kind of like, we make it work,
Yeah.
So thank you. It was a great conversation and great questions, Lisa. So thank you for sticking with us and bringing out the best in this, because it is fantastic. So we do have a couple questions coming in from Facebook, and then I always have my own that I have to just like find out. So first question is from Susan. What makes you use the form of a story for content and then use the form of a novella for a story? And what's the difference in engagement for your reader?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I don't know what the difference in engagement for the reader is. I mean, you would have to answer it, and I think some readers are going to have a different experience. A lot of people think they only love novels, but I would argue that they could love a short story too, and that they should give different forms a try, because it's really just story. I mean, some stories fit in a smaller space, and some stories need, to be expanded. For me, what I love about short stories, and I think the novella has this to it too, is there's this way in which there's compression. You're really pressing things in. So in the story of Virginia, It's Not Your Home that we were talking about, that Lisa really liked, you have a whole lifetime in like a handful of pages. And there's something different about reading about someone's whole lifetime in a handful of pages than it would be in a volume of 10 books. And there's a way that in that story, there's this idea of regret and time slipping away from you. And so it makes sense that the story would have this, you're like, oh my God, the story's over. And, she's feeling this sense of dreams deferred, like what Lisa said, of did I get what I want? Is there still time? She's kind of asking at the end. The novella for me, it's hard to write a novel when you're teaching full time. So I kept telling myself, this is just a short story that's a little bit longer, but it needed more. So I had a beginning and ending. I had some main actions. I had main characters, and they needed more space to kind of earn the ending and to make it make sense and to figure out how they were going to live, to make it, how were they going to, they're up at Monticello, how would they what would they eat? Just all the technical things. It needed enough space to make sense, but it also needed enough compression that it's almost like a journal that someone's writing in these frantic days up there. It's not her being able to go back and be like, when I'm 80, well, what happened there? It's this feeling of urgency that suits that particular story. So
yeah, every author that I've ever talked to that writes short stories and they're hard to write, and you have done so many so wonderfully in this that it's incredible, because don't you agree, Lisa? I mean, it's amazing what you've evoked in these short stories. It's incredible. I'm hat tip. I mean, it is amazing. So
Julie, will you be I want you to be my like hype man, like just like come up in the morning, you can just say like a couple nice things.
I'll follow you around, Jocelyn, like over those commercials. It's like, you're doing great. But it's true. It's just like that is a talent that not all writers have, to be able to execute a short story in the way that you have. It is absolutely. So anyways, enough of the praise, I guess. So Susan is also asking, is your writing process organic, where characters come to you or change direction, or do you have an idea where you're going before you start?
It would be more organic. Usually I have an idea of a beginning, something happens. Often something happens that agitates me in the world or in my life. So I hear someone say something, I'm like, oh, why they say that? That bothered me. It's something that's just sticks with me. And then I start to collect around it a little bit of energy, a little bit of an idea of a premise. And then I usually try to write a draft, some sort of a draft, in a pretty quick amount of time. So I often in the summers when I was teaching, I would go somewhere where I could write and try to get some material. And then often my beginnings and ends are very set. And I'm, really thinking about the language and really working on the middle and making sure things make sense. And I have a writing group. And so often they'll give me insights. It's really good to hear what other people see in your work. They can't tell you like, this is the right thing to do. I mean, occasionally they can have really good ideas, but often they're just saying, this is what it seems like. Is that what you want it to be? Yeah. And so you're kind of seeing how it's reflected out in the world and you're kind of responding. and you're realizing what it is too, because I think the meaning often comes last. I think people say, oh, what did you mean and intend by that? And I hear a lot of people say, oh, I was very intentional. And I think some writers may be like that, but for me, I'm writing to figure out what I think about it. I'm writing to figure out how this feels and why this would be this way. And I'm kind of writing into question. So it's not an answer that I'm writing to, and I'm not making a declaration with it. And then sometimes at the end, when I realize what I want it to be, or the things I want to push on a little bit more, I can come back and do that more. But it's not like I set out to say, I'm going to write a story that's going to, do this or that. I'm more like, what would happen if this?
So you let the characters kind of feel themselves out a little bit and take that direction. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, this just came out 2 weeks ago. And I know all authors hate this question, but I always have to ask it. Because you're obviously, you finished this a while ago. It went through the editing process. So you have been writing other things, I'm assuming. Are you writing more short stories for us? Are you writing, what's our next project that's coming?
I had a question about the
gosh.
second book, because I know you have a second book that you're going to be putting out.
This is the favorite question of people. And I think it is the hardest question because, well, for a variety of reasons. One is, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. You don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, I just wrote my first book and it's out. And to like, look at the next thing.
Hey, what
hard.
next? What's next?
So I don't know exactly what the next book number 2 will be. I have a couple kind of folder projects. I've done a little bit of short story writing in the time since I sold the book. I published a news story and I wrote on some stories to now. But I've been so distracted, like it's been so exciting to have the book coming out and do this, that I haven't been able to totally dive in the way that you need to be able to like pull something together. But I know that I'm interested in kind of, I'm really interested in this piece of environmental and racial restoration. I'm really interested in like this idea of equity, this idea of connection, this idea of care and place. And I think that those things are going to probably take a center place, whether I do another collection or whether I do a longer piece. I'm excited about going on the longer route because, again, I actually just think I like short stories. They're easier for me. I think some people think they're really hard, but they make sense for me. But I do have more time together. I wrote these in pieces. It's really hard to write a novel in little pieces, I think, to have it be cohesive, because I was teaching full time and now I'm not teaching full time. And so it might be interesting to see what happens if I can put a more concerted long-term focus on the same thing. So
whatever
you'll know when I do. I don't know.
Whatever you write, we will read. So whether it's short or long, you have readers here for you. So
thank you.
And my question, Lisa, when we were having some little technical issues, one of the questions
Right.
that I was wondering was, did you sell this after you had completed it, or did you sell the idea to an agent, or how did that process go?
So I garnered an agent midway through the process before I'd written the novella, but I had several stories and I had the concept. We sold the book all together. So we had the novella, we had, decided which pieces, we'd ordered them, we kind of put together this idea, but we were open to how that, how it might look. But I'm really excited that it's all published together and it exists as its own little collection.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Things.
It's so wonderful. So we're about out of time. Lisa, again, thank you for your time for doing this. I appreciate it so much. San Diego is lucky to have you, so thank you. And UT is lucky that you're there. So thank you for always doing what you do too. And Jocelyn, thank you. It's been a pleasure spending this time with you.
It has. It's
Thank
been
you.
a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right.
both. And buy books, people, from Warwick's. Buy
We're
all
here-
the books.
We're
I'll
here for
ship
you.
them.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Right.